Good afternoon, and thanks for coming. I'm very happy to be chairing the first panel of our conference today. And again, I want to thank our dean, Monica Ponce de Leon, and our architecture chair, John McMurrow, for their support in putting together this event. And also, again, thanks to our staff at Taubman College, who I think all of our faculty would agree that you never fail to impress us in the way that you're good at these things that architects and academics are never really good at, like meeting deadlines and getting things done quickly. And lastly, thanks to my panel for coming today, and also to Claire Zimmerman for the conversations and debates that we've had these past several weeks leading up to these panels. So my name is McLain Clutter, and by way of disclosure, I am not a historian. So I guess it's fitting that I'm chairing our first panel this afternoon, which is titled Contemporary Projective Histories. It's the first of two panels on this first day of the conference that seeks to broadly examine the complex relationship between architectural history, or the complex relationship that architectural history has to the discipline of architecture and to the distinct discipline of history as practiced by the historian. In one sense, we can easily segregate these disciplines and the role history plays for each. On one hand, we have the discipline of architecture, which as a discipline is defined through the recitation and repetition of its own practices, conventions, and codes. So perhaps necessarily the vital perpetuation of such a discipline requires some historical reflection on the emergence and evolution of precisely these practices, conventions, and codes. This is one way that I would say this is one way that we as architects build disciplinary knowledge through mining history. And we use that knowledge to design for the present and perhaps to project a different future. On the other hand, we have the discipline of the historian, which is governed by its own conventions, protocols, and ethics that are often less in service of the production of instrumental knowledge for practice and more in service of the establishment of an intellectual framework of historical consciousness. Now, were these two disciplines, that of the architect and that of the historian, always so distinct, we probably wouldn't have much to talk about on this first day of the conference. But between these two disciplines lies a multitude of roles and identities that blur their distinctions and often spark contentious debates. The operative historian and the architect/dilettante historian would be two of these identities. So this first panel will begin to probe the contours of this space between the discipline of architecture and the discipline of history. The panel asserts that the history of architecture is replete with practitioners who have overtly positioned their work as a reaction to historical movements in architecture or as a natural continuity of historical teleologies. But at least at first glance, today's young design offices legitimize their work relative to historical narratives less and less. This session is hosting a panel of emergent practitioners and historians to discuss the role of history in contemporary practice. Through their presentations, they may question the role of history in contemporary practice. They may question what has been gained or lost through the apparent lack of historical positioning amongst today's emergent practitioners. And they may try to locate latent potentials relative to history lurking in contemporary practice. And in one way or another, each will question the fundamental role of history in the discipline of architecture. So to introduce the panelists, we have two architects and two historians who are actually also architects. First, we'll hear from Penelope Dean, who is assistant professor at the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She's an architect and writer. Then we'll hear from Mark Foster Gage, who is an associate professor and acting assistant dean at the Yale School of Architecture, as well as a founding partner of Gage Clemenceau Architects in New York City. Then we'll hear a presentation from Eric Howler, who is a principal at Howler-Yoon Architecture and a design critic at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And then finally, we'll hear from Timothy Hyde, who is an assistant professor of architecture at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Thanks.